Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about issue number 1 of Ironman, written by Spencer Ackerman and art is by Julius Ohta. But before we dive into the story, I want to ask you a favor. If you enjoy this video, please leave a like and a comment to help the channel grow. So with that said, this issue opens with a workers' union arriving at a Stark Rand plant only to find the main gate chained up with 2 security guards waiting at the entrance. So with no way to enter, one of the employees approached the gate and asked the question that was on everyone's mind, and that was, how were they supposed to work if the factory gates were closed? To which the guards, under their own authority, decided to transform into hulking creatures and went on an unprovoked attack. So as the workers started to run for their lives, only one man stood defiant. In fact, he didn't just stand his ground, he actually went on the attack and risked his own life and jumped on one of the monster's backs in order to help one of his fellow co-workers. Now, by any measure, this man would usually stand no chance against these monsters, but due to his military training, none of that mattered, and to him, the only thing that mattered was fighting for what he thought was right. So as the former soldier rushed back into the fray, a blue beam of energy ripped through the sky and slammed into one of the 2 quote-unquote guards and drove him deep into the dirt. For high in the sky, Ironman arrived on the scene, and one of the first things he wanted to clear up was that he wasn't responsible for the lockout. In fact, he went on to say that he just got there to inspect the factory that the old Stark Unlimited management opened. And to put the icing on the cake, he then went on to say these guys are nowhere near being a Hulk. So with that set straight, Tony then used a second blast to eliminate the gate that was once locked and then confronted the 2 imposters. And in Tony's fashion, he then proceeded to project a QR code so these monsters could partake in an HR survey if they were indeed layovers from previous management. Now while that was going on, Tony thought to himself that he was right not to bother wearing his anti-magic Mysterium suit for this routine check-in, which is something that would play a role later in this story. Now following that, the fight was on, as the 2 monsters jumped straight for him, and just like before, Tony put them down with 2 well-placed beams of energy. Once that quick exchange was over, the 2 creatures shifted to their human forms and took off. So with the day saved, Tony then asked the veteran from earlier, by the name Ramon, to escort him through the factory floor. So with that established, Tony landed on the ground just for Ramon to give him a cold shoulder, because, from Ramon's perspective, Tony was just like everyone else. To which Tony replied by saying he wasn't there to bust a union, because he just got back control over his company from the same guy who was ordering them to build weapons. And the only reason why Tony is even there is because his AI assistant alerted him to their organizing drive. And because of that, Tony figured that Ramon would be the guy to talk to. So with talks open, Ramon revealed the last Sentinel they were working on and stated that they were organizing against him because they knew he wasn't a fan of the Sentinels the previous management paid them to make. Now this was a curveball for Tony, because Tony wanted nothing to do with those genocidal robots of death. But that was when Ramon replied by saying they no longer make Sentinels, but instead they make artillery shells. But see, just because artillery shells were better than Sentinels didn't mean they were safer. Now at this point, Tony revealed that he wanted the factory to change directions to create semiconductors. Following that, Ramon brought up one more grievance that he had a problem coming to terms with, and that was, their objections kept changing from one product to another, and because of that, Ramon wanted so reassurance that it wouldn't keep changing. Now following that exchange, Tony agreed upon his request and shook Ramon's hand and agreed to put it in their contract moving forward. So with the deal complete, Tony took off back home, just for his armor to turn off mid-flight, and like a stone falling from the sky, the once Iron Man became a paperweight and crashed through the roof of the factory and passed out as he requested for an ambulance. Now with that going down, we then fast forward several weeks in a hospital in Manhattan, where Tony lay banged up. And when we get there, we get a dialogue from Tony saying he is getting too old because it is taking much longer than usual to heal. So after a long recovery process, Tony decided to do his own rehab at home while he investigated the accident. Because nothing in the diagnostics registers anything wrong with the armor's propulsion, fuel, or data systems. So for the life of Tony, he had no idea why he fell out of the sky. So until Tony found the answer, Stark servers are running a global armor update, which means every Iron Man suit would be getting a patch. So as that was going down, Tony questioned if he should go back to the Neuralink interface, which would sync the armor to his nervous system, because with that connection, it would alert him to a misfire before he even went airborne. But see, that too would have been a problem, because the link occurs in the midbrain, which is awfully close to the mesolimbic pathways. And as an alcoholic, Tony knows better than to mess with his brain's dopamine supply. Now with all leads running up dry, Tony's assistant informed him that he had a board meeting in 15 minutes. So with that event coming up, Tony then thought to himself, so much for that, because Tony couldn't be late to his first board meeting after regaining control of Stark Unlimited. Now with no time to waste, Tony pulled up to the meeting with his armor, right from his lab, and when he got there, Tony immediately introduced his newest idea, by the name Start Booking. Now Start Booking was an app where people could bet on superhero fights, which was good, because it required minimal overhead, and would bring in huge revenue if done correctly. And the purpose of Tony doing this was to take his company out of the weapons business, but unfortunately for him, the other board members had other plans. Because on the last panel, we see the former AIM Scientist Supreme, Dr. Monica Rappaccini, walking into the room. And almost as soon as she arrived, Tony lost his mind and asked if everyone was crazy, given her history. Now the way this all went down was the board spoke over Monica's proposal while Tony was inconveniently in the hospital. And see, that wasn't even the worst of it, because while Tony was gone, Monica and AIM were also moving to acquire Stark Unlimited with the help of their partners at Roxxon. And they were going to pull it off, based on Stark's current share prices as it stands. Now with the stock price low, and several board members in her pocket, all that was left to do was a small vote, and once it passed, an oil company and a villain science corporation would buy Stark Unlimited and continue to make weapons. So with this meeting going anywhere but Tony's way, we then fast forward to Tony venting over everything that just happened. Because Tony just got his company back just to be put in checkmate by someone else, because if he moves to shut down the weapons plants on his own, then the board members would sue him, and then oust him for taking action without them. But no matter what he chose to do, they were already going to oust him anyway, and as for Jack Jr., one of the members of the board, he had already signed a letter of intent with Roxxon and AIM to pursue the merger. So, as things currently stand, there was absolutely nothing Tony could do to stop this from going down. So, with everything, as I said before, going bad, Tony decided to go on social media and argue with a troll. And as soon as he responded to the troll's comment, an explosion went off, because apparently, this troll set off a bomb near Tony's home because Stark left his location on. Now, with no time to waste, Tony rushed to the scene to find a building on fire. To his shock, Daredevil wasn't already there given it was closest to Hell's Kitchen. So, after a brief scan of the structure, Tony found that no people were caught up in the explosion. Following that, Tony landed and started to put out the fire, only to be blindsided by two unknown enemies. And after Tony caught his bearings, he discovered the people who attacked him were the Tiger Pack, the same trolls he was arguing with on social media. So with the fight on, Tony quickly started to make quick work of them, until one of them was able to bite down on Stark's knee, and by the looks of it, the villain's teeth were able to pierce the armor. Now this pain was excruciating and was to the point where Tony had to put an end to it, because during this battle, Tony was reactivating his wounds from his fall just weeks prior. So with a great deal of force, Tony slammed the two members of the Tiger Pack into the ground. And just like that, the battle was over. Then following that, Tony noticed a phone set off to the side with a ring light recording and streaming the entire event. And after seeing that, Tony couldn't help but to think how good his idea was. So with that being exposed, one of the members of the Tiger Pack went on to say that when the boss says take a punch, they take a punch, and to Tony's detriment, he didn't even wear his magic armor. So following that situation and the mention of his magic armor, Tony couldn't help but to think he was being taken as a fool, and immediately rushed to his secret storage place. Now as he flew, Tony thought to himself, whatever shorted out his suit at the Sentinel plant wasn't mechanical sabotage, nor malware, but instead magic base. Now this revelation made sense because his diagnostics didn't catch anything. So as Tony continued to fly, he then started to think to himself, how did a low-level villain like Flying Tiger knew about his anti-magic suit? But regardless of the answer, Tony had to get to the bottom of who was messing with his armor. And as soon as he landed in his warehouse, two gigantic purple fists hit him right in his face, for the two brothers from the beginning of the issue were back for round 2. Now following that hit, Tony, once again in pain, could feel his staples popping out, so with the situation going from bad to worst, Tony had only two objectives in mind, and that was getting his Mysterium armor secure, and then getting to a hospital. So with the clock ticking, Tony powered up his repulsor ray and let loose, and took out the person before him extremely quick. So with that battle won, Tony tells the remaining monster to get his friend and leave his warehouse now, because it's been one of those kinds of days. But just as he said that, a female voice interrupted him and said it wasn't his warehouse anymore. And once the lights was on, it was revealed to be Justine Hammer behind this ordeal. And according to her, this warehouse was now hers, and as for how she is back from the dead, she just stated that Roxxon has powerful allies in other dimensions. In fact, those allies brought her back to close the acquisition because it only made sense to use a hammer against the Stark. And then Justine went on to state that Roxxon lent her a berserker team. So first, she locked him out of his weapons plant, then second, she sent Flying Tiger to distract him with the explosion as she raided his warehouse for his treasure hidden within. Now, with the bad news in hand, Tony called for his Mysterium armor, only for nothing to happen. So with that being an epic failure, Justine let out a laugh, touched her necklace, and within moments an armor started to appear on her. As that was going down, she continued to say that his Mysterium armor was the last component she needed to create her new Ironman gear. Following that, we see a Mysterium-powered Ironman gear about to go in on Tony. And on the next page, we see just that, as Tony and Justine start to go at it. And no matter what Tony threw at her, Justine's new armor was just too powerful for him. In fact, one hit rattled the screws in Tony's spine and caused him immense pain. With that happening, Justine then went on to say that Tony is missing the big picture, for this isn't a normal armor war, for he had already lost. Because all of his armors are about to be hers alongside his whole weapon company due to his board members voting in her favor. To which, Tony responds by saying that is why he loves capitalism, because it's not democratic, and lets out a gigantic blast at Justine. But to Tony's horror, the blast did nothing but reflect off Justine's armor. Following that, Justine then went on to say that the world's largest oil company is pretty well capitalized, and his board sees the bigger picture. And as for Roxxon had chosen the new CEO to be AIM Scientist Supreme. And once she was in charge, AIM would then have control over both Stark Unlimited Global Arms and the energy market. And the way they were able to pull it off was because Phylong gave them an opportunity, for he took Stark Unlimited back to its core competency as a weapons company. And to make things worse, Tony still couldn't see that his defeat had already happened, because the reason why his armor fell out of the sky was because Justine told it to drop. And just like that, Tony's armor turned off and fell from the sky. So as Tony lay defeated, Justine continued to say that Roxxon's extra-dimensional allies added something magical to AIM's malware, for they uploaded it into Stark servers at the Sentinel factory. And if Tony was just wearing his Mysterium armor, all of this could have been avoided, but instead, he failed. So once Tony ran his global armor update, all suits became under her control. Now, with the battle won, Justine landed on the ground and told Tony that he should learn magic and that even one of his old Avengers allies is working with her now. With those words, she said goodbye and that she would see him at the vote as she got into her car and drove off. Following that on the last page, we see Tony going back to the basics as he starts to craft a new suit, and as he does that, Tony admits that he spent too much time in the hospital and he neglected his company alongside his father's and his own legacy because he was too busy playing superhero. And Justine was wrong about a few things, and he would be the one to teach her that Roxxon and AIM are seriously undercapitalized. And when Justine said this wasn't just another armor war, she was right, because Tony is going to come down on her with all his might, and all their wealth will burn in the process. So with that said, this issue of Iron Man comes to an end. But anyway, if you want to stay in the loop about any individual storyline, then how about you hop over to the playlist section down below or in the link cards above to get all caught up on the Avengers runs. So with that established, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next review.